when students or other young designers are asking me like, oh, how'd you get started? Do you have advice? I was like, make bad decisions and keep quitting jobs to take lower paying ones where you may have fun for 6 months.
Hello and welcome to Did I Do That? I did that one really weird. I like it. Hello and welcome to Did I Do That? It's a podcast about making graphic design and making mistakes because it's all part of the process. I'm Sean Schumacher, and joining me today, a very special guest. You may know him from his blog Ultra Sparky, or from projects like Pink Mints, the Hot Type Club, Bijou Type, or Letra Slut. He's worked for some of the biggest names in type, and previously he served as type director at Monotype, and then as senior manager of font development at Adobe. And these days, he's the director of type products at Type Network, a catalog of independent foundries and designers representing some of the best type design work happening today. It's Dan Rhatigan. Hi.
Hi. Good Googling, Sean.
Well, I wish I could take more credit. It was just visiting your LinkedIn page and transcribing the results.
It's the magic of SEO.
Yeah, LinkedIn. Thank you, LinkedIn, for making... I remember... I feel like when I was...
Was that your bid for sponsorship right there?
Yeah, LinkedIn, please. Actually, yeah, if LinkedIn wants to sponsor me, I'm down for it, please.
Get that LinkedIn money, girl.
It's the goofiest social network there is, and that makes it my favorite by far. If it wasn't so incredibly cumbersome to post things to it, then I would be posting all the time. But that it is cumbersome means that there's few things posted to it, and that makes me very happy.
I update it every time I have to find a job.
Truly the only time anyone really visits LinkedIn. You know you're looking for a job when you're just like, well, you know, maybe spruce up the old LinkedIn page just a little bit. Yeah. Oh, that header background, that could use an update. So thank you so much for being here. You came here on very short notice as well. We just talked was it yesterday or the day before or something like that?
I think you wrote on Sunday, and then yesterday morning I was like, oh, this seems like a fun thing. Yeah, sure, I'll do that. But, it's the end of the year. Work is easing up. I work with a lot of folks who are on the East Coast, so my afternoons are flexy and more laid back for the most part. So.
Oh, that's perfect. And especially since, sunset here right now is roughly at 3 p.m. or so. It's a really great time to be in Portland, I feel like.
I've only lived in Portland a little over a year. And when I would tell people I'm coming here, even since coming here, they're like, oh, why would you come to Portland? The weather's so awful. But it's the weather is exactly like the climate that I dealt with when I lived in England for years, which I was fine with. And, it's better than New York in the summer or the winter, so I'll take it.
Well, yeah, a few things are worse than a New York summer. If you want humidity and stink, it's a great intersection of those two characteristics. So you've been out here a year. Where did you grow up, though? Where did you start out?
I grew up in New York City.
You grew up in New York.
I lived in Staten Island. I started my lifelong campaign to get out of Staten Island for good by choosing to go to a high school that was on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. So I just kind of ran around Manhattan as a teenager in the 80s. And
oh, damn. That's a pretty sweet way to do things.
That is, I really get a lot of cultural street cred out of that when I need to drop it. When I lived in England when I went to grad school there and then lived there for a few years after. And I would run into a lot of people who were just oh, well, it's London's great. It's where everything's happening. Oh, you're an American. And I really discovered that talking about it's well, actually, I grew up in New York City in the 70s and 80s, and it was like going nuclear. In terms of being oh, you think you've seen some shit? Wow. Let me tell you about the High School Musical I was in with Gwyneth Paltrow.
I'm sorry, what? You were in a High School Musical with Gwyneth Paltrow?
Yeah.
What was the musical?
You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. She and her friends were doing it for a high school English elective project. They sort of evaporated about halfway through the rehearsal process. And I don't really know how they got their credits for that, but it was just, I was reading an article with her years later after she'd been famous and stuff, and she just made a reference to her mother, and I put it together. It's oh my God, she's that rich girl I knew in high school. Okay.
Did she in those days seem to have any designs to make sort of jade eggs or any of the other questionable health claims?
I was surprised as the rest of us.
So she didn't even act in the final play, though. This was just like,
yeah, like
she's a floater.
My friend Neil and I, we just sort of like got word from like the younger brother of one of the other girls who was working on this went to our school, and he like came up to us in the cafeteria one day. He was like, "We need the scripts back. They're not going to do the play." I was like, "All right, whatever."
Oh, so the play didn't even happen.
Yeah, like I said, I don't know how they like got their credits, but it's just one of those like weird, very New York-y things that I feel happen to like lots of people who live their lives. You just have run-ins with people.
I guess so, yeah.
And, it's wacky.
Yeah.
I have tons of weird little like celebrity adjacent stories like that just from going about my business.
I also love the fact that they were reclaiming the scripts as though those are the only copies of Your Good Man Charlie Brown they can locate.
Well, like if a high school does a play, they have to like rent the scripts and certain things. It's like part of the package of when they pay the rights for that.
That makes sense. Yeah. Oh.
I don't know if that still like goes on.
Yeah.
This is like 1987. This was happening.
Well, probably high schools now don't have any money to rent scripts, so they're just doing things in the public domain, plays from before 1917 or whatever.
Yeah. More power to them. So
you're kind of floating around during high school in that like kind of the most vibrant period of the New York scene.
Yeah, I mean it was a really, really fun time, and also because I went to this all boys, all scholarship private school on the Upper East Side, so we were like, the school's mission was to like get kids from like Catholic schools in the vicinity and give them a chance to like get into the Ivy League.
Oh,
it was like definitely like a magnet school. So all of my friends like lived like an hour and a half away from school like I did, but in all different directions. So really to hang out with your friends, you would just be like running around Manhattan.
Yeah.
Like after school. And that was just really fun to do in the mid 80s. It's like, here I was as like 14 years old. It's like, well, bye mom. I'm going to go like travel for an hour and a half across New York City. I guess I'll see you tonight. And you have to like learn to be like not a target, riding the subway, running around. I mean, I remember a night my friends and I, like, we almost got beat up by the Hells Angels because we walked down the wrong block in the East Village because we didn't realize it. It's
just some block that they controlled.
They had like their building on this one block in the East Village that it was their turf.
Yeah.
And like we were like walking on our way to go see a play, and I realized where we were, and it was like I just like looked over, like the one guy who's in our group who's like wearing his varsity jacket. It's like, fuck. It's like eyes straight ahead, put on the don't fuck with me face. Everything will be fine.
I also don't want to get on the Hells Angels bad side, but Manhattan seems like maybe the worst place that you could set up your motorcycle club.
I mean, if you want to like show that you can like manage your turf anywhere, that seems really good.
Well, then you may as well found a Hells Angels chapter for the moon if that's the case.
Why not? I mean, someone should get that place in order.
Yeah. People are just leaving trash all over.
But like, it's funny that like years ago, I had to really get over this instinct that a lot of people who've grown up, not just, in a place like New York, like Portlanders do it. People anywhere where they've grown up with like, oh, it's not the same as it was. It's changed.
Oh, yeah.
And it was like, oh, I actually don't have nostalgia for how it's changed. Like, certainly a big city, like it's always in change. That's part of the nature of it. And it's like looking at it objectively, I don't really miss a lot of what New York was in the 80s because it was like dangerous and dirtier. It was a lot more fun, but what I miss is being a little bit like young and fearless and naive.
Yeah,
like I loved like not realizing that I was going to like almost get assaulted by the Hells Angels or when everything is just like new and you're excited to explore it and you sort of don't know enough to realize why you should show caution.
Yeah.
Everything seems terrific. So why not? I just kind of like miss who I was at those various moments over the years. Like,
yeah. Well, and I think that's also like the intoxicating truth of like nostalgia is like you are not remembering the actual truths of the moment. You're remembering how you felt.
Yeah.
And I mean, like the people who are remembering the 50s with fondness, they're remembering Leave It to Beaver, but not their actual lives
Yeah.
and how
Well,
messed up they probably were.
Exactly. And like, even with things like, how I've worked over the years, like when I first met Briar Levitt, we were talking about like Letrosec. She was doing her documentary, and it was like really fun to talk about like, oh, it was like cool to be working at this point where like the analog era was hitting the digital era and you're hacking your way around. It's fun to talk about that and put it in context. Around was like, it's like, oh, this doesn't work. Oh, I guess I have to figure out how to do like this now because the printer doesn't know what I'm doing on my end. And I have to figure out how to get the software to do something that will make sense for the mechanical. And it's that thing about nostalgia. Sometimes you just have to take a step back and be like, it's all part of the journey, man.
Exactly. Like during this time, was that kind of where you started to discover design, or did you already kind of know about it?
I grew up wanting to draw comic books.
Oh, really?
I was like really into like comic books and science fiction superheroes, and I like to draw. My friend Eddie and I would like make up our own comics. And the way he and I have talked about this is perfect. He's he went on to become a filmmaker. He always loved writing stories and writing like sort of like fake TV show treatments. And I really loved like drawing the mastheads of these comic books, but I'd really lose interest when it would come to like doing something on the inside. And like he went on to like, become a storyteller and like, a TV producer. And I went on to like just draw letters for a living. But so since I liked drawing comics and lettering and stuff, I started working on the high school newspaper. And I became a graphics editor.
Oh.
Primarily because like, I would draw like a buxom female Santa that all the guys in like the all boys school got a kick out of every year. But in working on that around the office, the newspaper office, there was stuff for like putting down headlines in the newspaper. And it was like Letraset and this like a Croy headliner machine, which is almost like a way of like putting black type onto a piece of Scotch tape that you could lay down on a mechanical board. And I just had fun playing with that because in like starting to use that stuff in the comic strips that I was drawing, I was like, oh, wow. Like, so you can like change the way these letters look and it like changes the whole personality of what I'm doing. Oh. And that became a lot more fun than what I was drawing. And dawned on me after a couple of years of that, there's like, oh, this is like a thing that I could do. There's like a profession that does this.
Yeah.
That seems fun. It just sort of took off from there. And, and I studied graphic design in college, and I worked as a graphic designer for years and years and years, and just realized that typography was always the thing that I loved most about graphic design. Like where I worked as a graphic designer over the years, like, I became like the go-to type guy. Like, I did a lot of freelance work for a public television station. They're like, oh, we're doing the annual report. Get Dan. Like, he can like lay out the entire back section like nobody's business. And,
all the sponsors and everything.
Well, like the financials, like the hardcore typesetting stuff. Like,
damn,
it's like the systems just felt natural to me.
Yeah,
do it. And I had good visual sensitivity for stuff like that. And then I just more and more I gravitated more into the type side of things until I finally realized that I didn't want to make websites. I was like a technically competent graphic designer as the web was really happening. I saw this slippery slope like opening up ahead of me. It's like, oh, if you're going to be the guy who can do the websites, you may have to become the guy who does all the websites. I was like, nope.
Oh, hey,
I'm out.
That's how I got into this business.
And so I just decided to like really lean into the part that I liked and over specialize.
Yeah.
Luckily, that worked out. It was a big risk. I quit all my jobs and took out a bunch of loans and left the country. But I really like found my thing.
Yeah.
Thankfully.
So when you're like going into college, you went to college at Boston University. Did you already have kind of that knowledge of type, or was that something that you kind of discovered
not at all.
as you were there?
I mean, I just sort of had like a vague idea of like design seems like the thing that you can do in an art school that at least will let you have a job.
Yeah.
Like my parents seemed very disappointed at first because they were like, well, if you like art, why don't you become an architect? And I was like, well, I don't like math.
Oh. And you're not going to be much better off job-wise in architecture.
Well, and, I didn't even have the scope of that because, and even at BU, like you do 2 years of just traditional fine art stuff before you focus. I didn't do any graphic design until I was like a junior. But I just like was into this idea of design that really came very directly from the idea that like starting with the stuff I was doing in the newspapers, like that is the medium I enjoyed working in. I enjoyed layout boards and working with type and constructing things and learning, being taught stuff about typography is like, oh, this all makes sense. This is fun. Like I really like making things this way.
Yeah.
And influencing the way things feel using this stuff.
Did you kind of specialize in doing like layout type stuff in school? Like what were you starting to focus on there?
Well, again, studying graphic design in 1990 was pretty clear cut what it was all about. You like learned how to do magazine layouts, book layouts, how to like do a mechanical and make grids. Like at BU, like we also had requirements to do photography and printmaking.
Makes sense.
So it was just like, really it hadn't gotten to the point where the education was about like, which of these many digital tools are you going to try to master?
Yeah.
Like this is part of why I sort of, like pieced out from working as a graphic designer was because it felt like design was becoming about more and more and more specialized skills that you had to kind of like throw into your toolkit. And, when I was studying design and practicing for the first decade or so, you could like function as sort of like, a multifaceted graphic designer by doing a little bit of everything because the everything was a lot less of what there is to do now.
Oh God,
I mean,
so much
so
now.
like, and by trying to specialize just in type, that's an intersection of design thinking and technology thinking and business thinking. That is its own whole world. That's plenty to keep up with.
Yeah.
Like, when I was like trying to, let's roll back a little bit. When I was going to get ready to move to Portland, I had a mortgage lender be like, oh, you haven't been running a business for 2 years yet. I can't give you a mortgage. I was like, guess I got to get a job if I'm going to buy a house.
Is that really? Oh God.
Yeah. I was like told straight, it's like, oh, I can't give you a mortgage. You haven't been self-employed long enough. This is like 6 months after I'd left Adobe.
Oh boy.
And I was like, okay, well, I guess I have to find a job somewhere. And I realized like, I don't have the skills to be a graphic designer anymore. Like my actual just professional skills in that area are like 15 years out of date now. The fact that like I think in color separation and can do page layout, works really well for making a zine, but, not for sort of like walking into someone's studio and being useful right away for the most part.
But I mean, I think like, there's those technical skills that change, but like the fundamentals of, layout and type and
I think the fundamentals are in there, but like if you're looking to hire someone, are you looking to hire someone whose skills are like 15 years out of date? And then who's going to be like a total like snob about all the type you're doing? I mean, looking at it in the big picture, like my career now is like over 30 years because like I'm a middle-aged fart. It's very different. Like I started learning graphic design when our school computer lab was like 8 Mac SE30s that were daisy chained on an Apple Talk network running the same license of Quark Express. Like
couldn't plunk out that 179 to get the full 8 licenses.
Absolutely not. I was excited when Adobe released InDesign 1.0. It was like, oh, there's something else we can do. Like even now, like when I tinker on a website, I have trouble wrapping my head around doing more than just writing HTML and CSS by scratch because that's about where I tapped out.
Well, yeah.
Of just what the process is like.
Well, that's a great example, though, of like, because the web, I feel like changes so fast that if you, like, I was doing a job where I was not actively working on websites for probably about 2 years. And in that 2 years, it changed so radically that when I tried to come back to it, I was like, well, I don't know this language. I don't know what any of this new stuff is. We're compiling code now?
Yeah.
I don't know if I like that.
But it's just like, like a choice you make in the stuff you want to keep learning.
Yeah.
I'm useful working in the type industry because like I'm curious about how things move in there. So like that knowledge is like far outpaced people who just like, I just wanted to like pick a font, and now I have to think about like how it renders in Windows. And, it's like
That used to be so big of a thing. The kids don't know.
it's always like more and more and more and more. And it's just, you sort of, you choose your battles. And then by the time you realize like, actually, I would rather hire someone who's into that side of it.
Yeah.
To like help me do something and let me focus on the part that like brings me joy, that, feeds my curiosity enough to keep up with it.
Yeah. So like after college, you actually were working as a typesetter at Boston University,
Yeah,
right?
that was like, I approached that job with this spirit of like, I'm going to apprentice. I'm going to go deep into type. Like I was nerding out at a very like early point in my design career about taking the type side seriously. It's like, oh, this is like a good job where I'm gonna just like really, really get the fundamentals about how to work with this technically and visually. And it really turned out to be the case.
Yeah.
And it was a fascinating time to work because I had also, so this is I worked at the Office of Publications at BU that did all of the university's like internal stuff. And I'd applied for a job there as a graphic designer, and like I didn't even get an interview.
Oh.
But then I had an opportunity to apply for this job as a typesetter because the person who I'd be replacing sat in on one of my design courses, and she mentioned it. I was like, oh, yeah, that sounds great. And I loved the job. It was fun, but I was hired to be like the Mac guy in the type office because they'd used a pre-desktop digital typesetting system, this sort of like server-based system where the typesetters were typing and then keying and formatting codes around it.
Oh, okay.
And then assembling that into galleys that would get printed out on an image setter for someone else to then like, cut up and lay out into mechanicals.
Wow.
But
this sounds cumbersome.
There's a great documentary called Graphic Means
I've
that
heard,
goes into
you're
the nuts and bolts of what life was like then.
Wow, so I can just watch this movie Graphic Means and find out all about it.
It's fantastic. You'll hear a very familiar voice as the first spoken words in the documentary. But so all the designers in the office, they were starting to do their own page layouts with Macs. They were using PageMaker. And instead of like speccing things out and sending it to the type office, they were starting to do all their own typesetting in the layouts. And it wasn't great. And the typesetters didn't know how to help them.
Yeah.
So the typesetting office needed someone who knew how to use a Mac, which I had been doing in school because I didn't want to use Letraset. So I was like, I'm going to learn how those little machines work. And it was great because I really was right there at this intersection of these two worlds where I was helping people who like were more skilled at some things than I were understand how to map those skills to like technology that I had a handle on. But then I was also in charge of making sure that they weren't like sending stuff that wasn't refined to the very expensive image setter. So I had to like stay one step ahead of them about how to make this stuff look good so I could help them. And it was great. It was cool. And then I ping-ponged back and forth between like sort of typesetting style jobs and design jobs over the years because that system that they used in the office was a very like specialized big piece of software in its own. And when I moved back to New York, there was a technical publisher there who heard that I was the only person in the city who was already trained in how to use the system.
Ding, ding, ding.
Like the whole time that I worked after moving back to New York, after being in Boston for a while, I would work at this technical publisher where I was essentially writing software code for typesetting.
Wow.
And then like that would become creatively frustrating. So I would quit and then I would do freelance work for the public TV station, which was the most fun place to work and where, you're doing like churning projects for like educational programming. So it didn't feel ethically like icky at any point. But like small budgets, quick turnaround. So it was like fun material to work with, really taught me to make decisions fast.
Oh my, does nonprofit work ever do that?
Yeah. But, which is great design training. But then I'd be like, well, I'm also getting poorer and poorer by the day. So I'm going to go back and work in typesetting for a while.
Nonprofit work does that too.
Yeah. So like, I had this, it was all this very weird back and forth about like, oh, what do I want? That in the end actually was setting me up for what it's like working in type design, which is very technical intensive and very design intensive.
Yeah. So you're kind of bouncing around between these different things in New York.
Like, I feel bad when students or other young designers are asking me, like, oh, how'd you get started? Do you have advice? I was like, make bad decisions and keep quitting jobs to take lower paying ones where you may have fun for 6 months. Like, I've always worked in design and type in some capacity, but it has been such an absurdly haphazard path.
So it's less a ladder and more sort of like an inverted bell curve.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was kind of the moment somewhere in there where you found type design as the thing that you wanted to do. Like, what was the moment where you realized, like, I probably need to go and learn about this?
I was picturing New York City, 2005. My partner at the time was employed by the AIGA doing like admin stuff. And I was around AIGA events in New York City all the time. Meeting like, the cream of the crop of the design scene, but being like I'd be like the flunky who was around. Like, I was helping out here, helping out there, hearing all these great people talk. And I was very frustrated with where I was because I'd been working doing like nonprofit stuff or this like very dry technical stuff, which is intellectually interesting in terms of problem solving, but the outcomes weren't pretty.
Yeah.
I just felt like, I've been working for like 15 years already and I haven't gotten anywhere. And so I was looking into grad schools. When you're working with all of these storied designers who have these impressive careers, you're like, do I just need time to like focus so I can make that leap? And I had applied to Yale and School of Visual Arts and got turned down the first time. And I was getting ready to reapply because I was like turned down like with a sense of encouragement.
Okay.
I should sort of come back. And I was getting ready to reapply and I was at TypeCon in New York City. And during a break, I was sitting in like the foyer and there was a table with flyers. And there was this little like A5 for Americans, like half letter sized piece of paper talking about this program that for an MA focusing on typeface design. And I was just looking at that thing, it's like, I didn't even realize that was like a thing you could do. I had never done any type design at all because I took type so seriously. I felt like that was a huge responsibility. You don't just design a typeface. That would be crazy talk. That was, all that work that I was doing as a typesetter, becoming a specialist with typography is like me, like earning my way to get there to be able to do that.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh, this is actually, because when I had been thinking about these other graphic design programs that I was considering, I was already like preparing myself to negotiate in my head how to tell them, well, you require that you do some motion design. I don't want to do that. Like, I was already like trying to weasel out of the stuff they wanted you to learn as a well-rounded graphic designer so I could focus on typographic stuff.
Yeah.
And then this thing comes up as like 1 year instead of 2. That 1 year cost less than a semester at the programs I was looking in. And it was in Europe and it was just doing typeface design.
Wow.
And it just like everything came into place. And the Jerry Leonidas, who's the course director for that at Reading, was speaking at TypeCon, which is why the flyer was there. And so I just like found him at the closing night party and chatted with him about like, what I'd been up to and, how much I circled around typography. And he's like, yeah, sounds great. You seem like this could be a good place for you. And he handed me over to Sarah Soskolny, who had only recently started working for Jonathan Heffler at that point. And she had done the program in Reading, and she had very good feedback for me about what the experience would be like. And so I was sort of laser focused after that. Everything was, this is exactly what I've been looking for all this time.
Yeah.
To go deep on the thing that I loved. And a lot of my thinking about that was, I've spent so much time using typefaces to have a real sense of like how I need them to perform, what they need them to do.
Yeah.
So why shouldn't I be the person who could make those decisions to get a typeface to do a certain thing properly?
When you're looking at them that closely, like you're forming so many opinions in your head, like it only makes sense to turn that into like making.
And, and of course, the way that things often happen, when you get down to it, when I got to Reading and I started drawing some stuff for the first time, there was so much I took for granted. Like I drew, like I think the first set of sketches I did, I drew an M totally backwards because I never consciously thought about where the heavy parts go and where the thin parts go. Because that was the level I didn't have to. That had already been dealt with by who had ever made every typeface I ever used.
Yeah.
So it was great to realize, like, immediately, I can't even be arrogant about what this process is going to be like because I really have to start from scratch in a lot of ways and build it all back up.
What was your first typeface like that you developed there?
I have an example of it right here.
Why?
So Reading has a very particular process. It's a very research-driven, practical program. So you do a bunch of exercises to think about how you draw, look at different typefaces, but they're encouraging you to do something appropriate for extended reading as really a test of all these things that you've been digesting.
Yeah.
So I worked on a typeface called Gina, which my brief at the time was I wanted to design something that was good. It was a good response to all the typographic problems I was running into working at this technical publisher. So how do you marry Greek versus the Latin alphabet for doing equations rather than for text? How do you get equations to read almost like another writing system that sits alongside English text? How do you design a book typeface that can survive like low-cost reproduction methods? Because these technical books were like printed as cheaply as possible.
Oh, yeah.
But they cost, by the nature of them, they cost hundreds of dollars. So you wanted the text to look good. So I had a clear brief and a clear sense of all the problems. So I just designed to that.
You say that, but I'm looking at this and you've given yourself so many complicated things to do with this type. And then like extra things. You made small caps for this.
Well, yeah, because you use small caps. So it was, again, you throw into a project like this. Because, this isn't like we weren't doing a semester of knocking out a typeface. This is 12 intense months.
Yeah.
Of trying to get ready to make a career change into doing this. So, I mean, when I compare what I did, and even my classmates, if you look through that specimen book, there's a bunch of people who are doing fantastic things on the type world.
Oh, yeah,
these days.
Scholar. I've used Scholar and things.
David Brezhnev was my housemate that year. Nicole Doughton from Process Type Foundry is there. There's a bunch of people. And I feel like even our projects feel so unambitious compared to what I've seen happen in classes since. As with a lot of design, every group sort of ups the ante as they go along because they've seen what's come before.
These are all so beautiful. I'm going to be honest. I kind of like yours the best out of all of them.
Oh, stop.
I love a serif.
And I should have released that typeface the year after I finished at Reading, just wrapped it up somehow, put it out of the way, because I haven't released it yet, and I'm now so far away from it. Whenever I touch it, it like loses focus more and more.
Oh.
Because I bring into it every other thing I've learned and thought about since then.
Yeah.
And I don't think I will ever complete that typeface. I can use it as the starting point for something else.
Yeah.
But it'll wind up becoming something so different from what it was then.
Well, I mean, as we had a student here, Walton Brush, who I worked with for a very long time. And he in our type design class, he made a typeface called First Pancake because, your first typeface is often kind of a first pancake. Yeah. It's a little rough around the edges. It's maybe a little too thick or maybe a little too thin. As far as pancakes go, this is pretty damn good.
Well, it's funny that I've always bristled over the years when, at the end of the academic year, when Reading students, KBK students show their projects, they're often met with reactions on, type message boards and such, and people acting like their new typeface release.
Yeah.
And which get people on this bandwagon. It was like, oh, there's a Reading style, there's a KBK style. They're taught to all design things the same.
Really?
And I really bristle against it because we're not taught what things should look like. That's not the journey we're led through.
Yeah.
But we're there for 12 months. and we are challenged with mastering certain skills that like land you in certain places in order to show that you have like grappled with certain questions put before you.
Yeah.
Book typefaces, this is in Rhatigan's case, design for scripts that you're not a native speaker of so that you can understand research and grappling with shapes that are new to you. And what's always been interesting to me is looking at what everyone's second typeface looks like, because those are all done to a high degree of polish because we were incredibly focused and motivated, and we were getting the best resources to give us feedback. But what you really see in everyone's second typeface is what they do with all that stuff once they're like given the opportunity to think about what comes next.
Yeah. So like, what was the next like step for you? Like, where did things go from Reading?
The student visa that I was on to be in Reading allowed me to stay in England for another year to look for work. And if I didn't get, a sponsored job visa, I'd have to move back to the United States. And I went over there for grad school not knowing what the future would hold, whether I'd be able to stay, whether I'd come back, what I was going to do work-wise. So I hung around in England for that year. I took out another student loan to try to like get me through that.
Ooh.
And that ran out very rapidly. I was capped into like what else I could get. So it covered me for, the last couple months of the program, and then one or two after that. And I just started looking for like little freelance projects, and they were not coming very quickly. I've never been so close to absolute starvation as that year after grad school. But luckily my landlord was the course director. So whenever I couldn't pay the rent, I would tell him it was his fault. So he should wait a couple of weeks until like a paycheck comes out.
Damn.
But I did little freelance graphic design jobs here and there. I volunteered at the St. Bride Library, which is a great way to like learn where things were in their collection for research purposes.
Oh.
Like I said, my whole career for a long time was about like doing things for less money, but you could learn more, have more fun. But eventually,
well, it's working out.
Yeah,
so,
but eventually, this opportunity came up. The department at Reading had a research proposal that was approved for what they called a knowledge transfer partnership scheme, which is a UK scheme that embeds a person hired by a university to work in a commercial company, so that, the academic department learns more about the goings-on in the contemporary workplace. The contemporary workplace gets to draw on all the, latest research and skill building happening in the universities.
So it's kind of like some sort of spy scheme, but that both sides are happy with.
It's more like a high-level internship with a lot of bureaucracy. But it was great for me because project was to have someone work at Monotype and look at what they were doing about, global scripts, non-Latin typography. And I had spent that year after my degree, hanging around at the department, learning more about other worlds' writing systems, just by helping Fiona Ross with some projects. And I needed a work visa. So I got this job where I was employed by the university. My job was to be at Monotype and talk to as many people there as possible about how they worked, how they'd done things over the years. And by the time that 2-year period was coming to a close, they knew that Robin Nicholas, who'd been the type director at Monotype and had worked there since the mid-'60s, was getting ready to retire.
Oh.
And I had started helping out on some type design projects just when they needed an extra hand on something. So they offered to hire me once this research project was over. Because I had worked in so many different contexts professionally for years before going to Reading, it's like, oh, well, you'll be well placed, work for a year. I was basically set up to take over for Robin Nicholas, running the type drawing office. It was an incredible opportunity.
Yeah.
They didn't handle my visa application properly at the end of this 2-year project. So I got deported and went back to the States for a few months while they sorted that out. Went back, started working at Monotype full time, and that was great. I learned so much there. And I kind of that was really my professional reinvention. That's where I came back and was like, I'm a professional typeface designer. I understand this context. of the graphic design world because I'd worked in it, so I could go and I could talk to customers. And that really sort of set me up. But it was funny that since the whole idea about your podcast is about like the mistakes or the things that you're embarrassed about the way. When I did realize that I was going to get deported because my visa wasn't going to come through, I needed money desperately because I was counting on, starting a new job, and then suddenly I wasn't going to be able to work for months. And that's when Google Fonts was starting up.
Oh.
And I took on a commission. This is when they were starting to really build up their offering of fonts to be freely available for their web font service.
Yeah.
So I was one of those early fonts that they did where they were just like offering designers some bits of money to do things. And I figured, I was like, oh, well, there's a great opportunity. It will allow me to buy a laptop of my own, which I didn't own because I'd had one owned by my job. And it'll get me up on my feet. It'll give me some income. But I realized that like, oh, okay, realistically, the money for this project gives me about 2 weeks to work on a typeface.
Ooh.
And so I did two typeface designs. It was a month's worth of work, which I desperately needed, and it was great. But my ability to work fast and decisively had not fully formed as a type designer yet, the way it had been as a graphic designer. So I, for one of them, I reworked my Reading typeface. I made it lower contrast. I took elements more of like typewriter-y things because that's something they asked me to think about. And I reworked it in 2 weeks to something that was pretty good. I liked it at the time. But the more I've looked at it over time, I was like, oh, that is such like a junior typeface. Like the spacing is not great. The curves could have been better. But it was one of the first web fonts available on Google Fonts. It made its way into a lot of default templates for like blog CMS publishing tools.
Oh, wow.
So the usage of this typeface this month so far is 382,000 downloads. And it's, that's the one that didn't get used as much. The one where I reworked my Reading typeface rapidly, which it pains me because I can see so much more of what it could be.
I feel like we're dancing around the name of it. Do we?
No,
do you want to say it?
It's called Cops. I also, part of the mistake of this is I also used like two great names on typefaces I don't love, Cops and Aslach. And so Cops has been used 5.53 million times this month.
Wow.
And it's featured in more than 87,000 websites. It's a single style typeface, and it haunts me that I've not really, that I just put it out into the world. And, even like by like 2 years later, I'd be like, this is not up to my standards.
Yeah.
I was just like I was too raw at what I was doing.
You were actively in the process of being deported.
Yeah.
In fairness.
Yeah.
So
Aslach, the other typeface that I did where I did 2 weights, they've been used this month. No, this is over the last week, not last month. So Aslach was 382,000 used on 51 websites. Cops has been used 5.5 million times.
Wow.
Last week. And
that's quite a few times in a week.
And there's pains to me because I see all the things that could have been done better in these typefaces. And knowing that they're so widespread, it's like you can't pull that back.
Yeah.
But the thing that rubs me a wrong way, and this is more of a vanity thing, is I've worked on so many typefaces over the years. Mostly during the years I worked at Monotype, where I was doing custom type. So I've done a lot of stuff that doesn't have my name attached to it. I don't have a lot of commercially available typefaces. When I have to when people say it's like, oh, what have you done? I have to say it's like, well, there's this typeface called Cops that looks like a weird smushed typewriter typeface. You may have removed it from a blog template you downloaded for free from somewhere. But the reality is I've worked on stuff that is all over the place.
Yeah.
I led the projects for Southwest Airlines. I redrew Helvetica for CNN. The branding typeface for Salesforce, the Taco Bell logo.
It's some pretty fucking huge stuff.
But and then it's weird because the people's like, oh, you do fonts. What have you done? Well,
Yeah. But I mean, that's kind of the curse of, I mean, in a way, like type designers kind of have it the worst because like in design, I mean, I come from web more than anything else. And in web, you kind of always know that the thing that you're making is disposable.
Yeah.
It'll be up, if you're lucky, 2 years, and then it'll be completely scrapped. Or like a few terrible websites that I made still haunt you 10 years later.
Yeah.
And you'll be like, oh God,
Yeah, I have
why
those
won't
too.
it die?
You know?
But like with type design, like you're putting the thing out in the world and there's no versioning of it really. It's just out there forever.
Yeah. And you can't control what people do with it.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to take responsibility for what happens with like that piece of someone else's design.
Yeah.
It's such a blessing. I've seen people do really nice looking work with these Google typefaces, for instance, and I'm so grateful because, like I've not been able to like grapple with them as a graphic designer in a way that finds that secret sauce. But I've also seen just terrible things done with them. And I've seen terrible things done with really nice typefaces I've worked on.
Oh yeah.
It's just interesting. You have to let your children fly and become who they're meant to be.
Yeah.
But all this is why, after years of working at places like Monotype and Adobe, where I couldn't release my own typefaces because I wouldn't own the IP, which I've always felt very strongly about. So I've just not released the things that I've wanted to do for myself. So starting at Bijou is giving me a chance now, which Type Network very kindly allows and encourages, to publish the ideas that have been digesting for years and years now. It just unfortunately only means that I also have like nights and 1 or 2 days per week to actually concentrate on them. So it's going to be slow going.
Oh God. Well, but at least it's getting out there. Like, I'm glad that we're getting more typefaces that we can actually use, not just that Taco Bell can use.
Yeah.
Although
I didn't do a typeface for Taco Bell. I just drew the letters of the logotype. Because when I left Monotype, I had a non-compete clause, so I couldn't design type for a year. But,
really?
Yeah, but what I was allowed to do was draw logotypes. So I picked up, I became like the logotype surgeon contractor. So an agency team would be working on a brand identity for weeks. And say the letter forms of the logotype would start drifting more and more. And I would get called in to like just pull it back together and just put a fine polish on it and have that sit within all the other work that those teams had been doing about the strategy and the overall aesthetics. So I did a few of those, and those are really fun because those kind of projects hit around the time where I could be like fast and decisive in what I do because I'd had the practice now. So I really was like that guy, and it's only worked out for a handful of projects, but I was the guy who comes in and is like, in 3 days, I can get this back on track for you.
And that's got to be a fun role to be in. Like you are the fixer. You are coming in. There's this existing team that are probably just completely frazzled by the whole idea of like what went wrong.
Yeah, and and it was also when I learned that lesson that I think a lot of designers have over the years of like, when you give your quote for the job and no one bats an eye, you immediately realize you have undercharged for the value that you're apparently going to bring to this process.
Yeah. Always aim higher than you think you're gonna need.
I thought I was already doing that.
There's no ceiling with Taco Bell is the thing. That you go into a Taco Bell restaurant, which no one ever has, you always go through the drive-thru. But if you went in, you would notice there's no ceiling in the Taco Bell. It just keeps going up.
It's just heaven shining right down on you.
Shining right down on that cube that they make all the beans out. So in addition to your work with Adobe and Type Network, you're still doing your zine. How did you start on Pigments?
I have always done stuff on the side for fun. It's just how I deal with like not having enough creative outlet in whatever I'm doing work at any point. So I just make something for fun on the side. And particularly since starting work as a type designer, I don't get to do things with type a lot. It's a very different form of play than designing type is to work with typefaces. So at the time when I started doing Pigments, I was living in England and I was trying to make friends and I wanted to do something fun. It's like, oh, I'll make a zine. And I met like a couple cool people who do different things. We'll start doing it together. And I've been doing it for 12 years now. So it seems like, well, I can't stop because it's taken on a life of its own, but it still does the same thing. It lets me do other kinds of fun things that I enjoy.
Yeah.
And I love just like the intimacy of making a cool little print thing that you hold in your hands. And I'm always very stubborn about doing things with it that only make sense when the physical object is in your hands. It doesn't fully come across in that. It doesn't come across when you look at images on the web. And then it gives me a chance to use like fun type that I wouldn't necessarily be able to do in, the paying work that I do from day to day.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
So the one you're looking at now is a 12-color risograph issue.
I was going to ask.
Because I bought a riso machine just as I was leaving New York, and I shipped it across here to Oregon with the rest of my stuff. But it came with 12 color drums, which is amazing.
Yeah.
But I had to test every one of them. So I had to like come up with a project that like it made sense to use in 12 colors.
Ooh, that was probably a long production leg.
Actually,
one.
I just did it over the course of a couple weekends. It's like I thought a lot about how it would work and how to prepare the artwork, and then I just printed it in a couple of weekends.
Oh, this neon yellow! I don't even think I like this green yellow. I didn't know that existed.
Yeah. But it just seemed really fun. Like I've been doing all this research about the typography used in sort of gay publications over the years. And how that, there's certain aesthetics came out of the fact that they weren't like regular mainstream magazines.
Yeah.
Just when there were things like Letraset available so that they didn't have to go to like professional typesetters. And it's all about marginalization and democratization. But I've been looking at a lot of the typographic stuff. And so for this issue, it was like, it's basically like a choose your own dirty magazine title generator. So I got to use a whole bunch of awesome typefaces and set them in crazy colors.
Quivering Filthy Jamboree is one of the options.
Yeah. Again, if you're curious to see this in person, check it out at pigments.com. You're surely going to come to some you don't want to say aloud on the air. But it gets into it's. But it's like just to do something that is like fun and visually stimulating is a nice tonic for when you're sort of frustrated with writing emails and filling out spreadsheets all day.
Absolutely. You got to have some creative outlet from that, or else that stuff will just eat your brain.
And also like that stuff is the other part of my life. A lot of my struggle is, professionally is like I'm representing other companies. I'm trying to encourage trust from people who are like, come from different walks of life, do other things. At the same time, I also want to be like, look, like I'm also drawn to like this sort of like zesty, fun stuff. And, I want to do some stuff that's like gay. And just like, I always say like graphic design and typography, that is the art medium that I like to work in.
Yeah.
It's, it's what I have at my disposal to express myself in one way or another. So if like I can't do it at work, I can do it on the side. If I can't do it on the side, I'll do it at work. Try to like keep it all together. But I have to say that what was nice about having always done some stuff on the side, it's always worked out for me professionally that I've done that. Like when I was getting graphic design jobs, I put in these zines that I had done. There's another zine called Rumpus Room that I did in my early 20s. But it was designed well. And I put it in my portfolio to show that I could do some things that I didn't necessarily have opportunities to do in professional jobs. And people always responded well to that I had work that was self-directed and where I tried to like stretch my ideas and my capabilities. And even when I'd be talking about typographic stuff, since starting to switch over to being a type designer, when I would talk about Pigments as an example of how I was digesting research about these different things, it was really great to discover that people would be like, I didn't realize there was a space in my professional life for me to talk about my personal life or my identity.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, shit, that's actually what I've been doing by stubbornly not trying to let go of the stuff that I'm interested in on the side.
Yeah.
Like, it's me trying to knit my worlds together, but it's a big deal to be able to do that. And I'm lucky enough that I've had the chances to pull it off. And I definitely want to encourage other people to like bring their full selves to the table. And that's, and that's why like Pink Mints is very much a money losing hobby. But it's really
I know
important
a thing or two
to me
about that.
because I get to like express my full self in some capacity.
Yeah.
And actually show that these sides, my personal self is not separate from my professional self. Like the crossover of my interest in typography and, queer culture is very, very matter of fact and obvious to me. And I don't think it necessarily is for other people. So like, why not show that there's room for all these things to coexist?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think I hope it's inspiring to like the queer designers out there who are feeling like, what's the place for me in this field?
Yeah.
Like it's anywhere you want to be.
Yeah. I was listening to your interview with Kyle Latender, who is a neighbor of mine now. And I met him recently, but I was listening to him give a talk about this. I'd seen his stuff and he's so outrageously talented.
Oh, yeah.
And I was listening to him give a talk because I love his work and how like fully he brings himself into it. And he like saw me in the chat room and he's like, oh my God, Dan Rhatigan is here. Like, I don't believe it. And I was like, wait, why do you like why should you know who I am? But I think when we like met and we're like chatting, we realized that we've both been through that same journey of like, why shouldn't all of me be in the work?
Yeah.
Because I'd rather look at work that has more in it than less.
That's a really, really great thing to take away. Dan,
messy mistakes and all.
Dan, if people want to get their own copy of Pink Mints, where do they go for that?
The easiest place to get Pink Mints is at pinkmints.com.
Why? What a convenient URL for Pink Mints to be at.
SEO is very important.
And each one is like a little different in how it's
every
made
issue
up.
of Pink Mints is entirely different because it's not
That's fantastic.
It's not like a publication that has a format.
Yeah.
It is just kind of a wrapper for me to put around a little project of something I'm obsessed with at the moment.
Just something to make and be joyful.
Yeah.
And it's a zine, so like it can be anything.
Yeah. Like the latest issue, which is, I called it Give the People What They Want. And it is just pictures of hot dudes. Because, I had been doing so much typography stuff with other issues. Like, I also know that this is something that people enjoy seeing in Pink Mints is pictures of hot dudes. It's like, fine, do that. Here's one with like next to no fonts. So like you can relax and there's something for you too.
Something for everybody.
Yeah.
That is really fantastic. If people want to find more about your work other than Pink Mints, where do they go for that?
I'm so easy to Google because I've been on the internet for so long. Ultrasparky.org has been a website that I've been running since the late 90s. And so it is just a shambles of unupdated migrations from one CMS to another. But there's a lot of material there. I'm on Twitter at Ultrasparky. And bijoutype.com is the website that my foundry will be launching at.
Yes.
By the time people hear this, it's possible that may have more than just a holding page, but that certainly will be where to find all my typefaces within a couple months.
Yes, go check it out. You're going to see some beautiful type there. Like,
let's hope so.
You couldn't see him. Dan did some real intense, hope and pray fingers there. Well, thank you so much for being here, Dan.
It's been fun. Thank you for having me.
It's been a joy to have you here. And thank you to the listener out there. If you like this show, maybe you're hearing it for the first time. Maybe you're a longtime listener, first time caller. Wait, no, that doesn't work. Well, either way, why not subscribe to it in whatever device that you use for playing podcasts? You can search for the words "Did I do that?" in them. You can also go to YouTube. YouTube is also a place where these are being hosted now. Our YouTube URL is just youtube.com/@dididothat.design. And it's apparently very popular to listen to podcasts that just have a static image. So I'm no judgment here. If you enjoy it, then more power to you. I'm going to keep putting them up there. You can also learn about the show from our website, dididothat.design, which is where you can get to our various social media platforms, whatever those should be at the time.
SEO is so important.
SEO is so important.
I can't stress that enough.
That's a big part of why the show is called Did I Do That? Because I could get that URL. But on that website, you can find some good images that go along with each and every episode of this show. There's some other things that link to there also. But the thing that I'm looking at here is definitely out of date. So I'm not going to read that part. So this has been Did I Do That? I'm Sean Schumacher. And as we always say at the end of every episode,
what do you have to say? I wasn't given instructions.
That's what we always say. Okay, bye. Fantastic.
Maybe like a good actor exercise. Rutabaga.
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 Lou Bega's Rutabagas. That might be what he's up to now. I don't know.
I know a little bit how it works because I started listening to like episodes with people I know already, which is like catching up with old friends.
Yeah, I've heard that that's kind of the experience for a lot of folks. Someone was telling me that they like to fall asleep to it because it's like, just some of their friends hanging out, and like that was kind of a nice compliment. Like, I would think that it's probably a very loud show to fall asleep to.
I mean, it's boisterous, but that's good. I don't know if I'd fall asleep to it.
No, it's certainly not an ASMR podcast unless I really pivot very hard.
So I've been working on typefaces for years now.
Tell me about the typefaces you've been working on, Dan.
Yeah, the public radio voice I don't find very soothing to listen to. It's too easy to tune out.
It's a very sleepy voice. Yeah. But then you also, maybe the secret sauce of ASMR is then you also have like crinkling sounds. Oh, I'm touching the felt part of the microphone. Isn't this fun? I forgot that you have to deal with that sonic experience as well. That goof,
great, right?
Maybe it's the madness that has set in from having to spend 8 hours listening to my own voice and trying to edit out the dumber, weird sounds that my mouth makes. But I'm immune to it now. Yeah. I was making mouth sounds earlier, and I was like, these are funny. And then I realized, I can't release this. Everyone will hate this mouth sounds bit. This is a crime that I've committed. Okay. All right. So we're rolling. We're seeing levels on the thing. This is good. I peaked. Oh, no. I peaked.
Oh, but you've got so many years left.
You would think so, but apparently not. Not according to the recording technologies. It does make sense, actually.